creator of obesity, the destroyer of social lives, and the home of the troll. But where did it all start? Today, in this documentary, I hope to take you back. Back to a time before video games. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the documentary on video Games.avi! Media is the general term given to all forms of representation. For example, newspaper, books, TV, and of course, video games. The definition of the word is the creation of a visual and tangible rendering of something. In other words, something being painted in a certain way. The earliest form of media was around long before Pac-Man took to the screens, all the way to a magical little country known as France, in the Zurks. This cave painting that you can see on your screen right now is the earliest known form of media in existence, dating to be over 32,000 years old. There are many theories about cave paintings. Some theories hold that they may have been a way of communicating with others, while other theories ascribe them to have religious or ceremonial purposes. The term game originates from sports, and the first sport ever invented was a little closer to home. The first sports were hunting and war related, and the first sport to look like ones today was something invented by the Mayan people before the Egyptian Empire. Similar to soccer in appearance, though losing usually resulted in being put to death. The Greeks were the first to actually record games, in particular the Olympic Games. These sports were entirely male-based and involved running, spear throwing, wrestling, and other feats of strength. The earliest form of board game that we know about was backgammon, having its beginning sometime in the 1st century. It is believed that this game was created by the Romans. Later still, an evolution of gaming occurred when billiards was invented in the 15th century, later developing into pool. The term video originated from the long and tiresome process of evolution from papyrus to the printing press, not long before Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone with the first words,
"Mr. Watson, come here. I want you."
Film was invented by the Lumiere brothers with the invention of the cinema, with hand-cranked cameras. The Lumieres would film a train coming towards the camera, and show it to a large audience who didn't know what they were in for, and who naturally fled the theatre. What you can see now is the first recorded film, dating to be recorded in the year 1896. The television was invented later still, in 1884, to be demonstrated in the year 1926 by the Scottish man with a funny name, John Logie Bard. Finally, in the year 1941, the first computer, the Zeus Z3, was invented. But enough of all that guff, let's get to the gaming. In 1952, A.S. Douglas invented the first form of video game, a noughts and crosses game that ran on the computer called the Electronic Delay Storage Automatic Calculator. Not the most flattering name for a major milestone in history, but that's history for you. 1958 brings the first game to be recognised and called a video game. The game, Tennis for Two, was created by the physicist with the funny name Willy Tigginoff in Brookhaven National Laboratory, New York. In 1961, Space War is invented, the first interactive computer game, running on the digital TDP-1 mainframe computer. In 1966, people really started taking an interest in the idea of video games, and Ralph Baer, another funny-named evolutionist, received support to explore his ideas about creating video games for television. By 1967, he and his company are successful in creating 2 video games and are able to manipulate a toy gun to shine a spot of light onto a television screen. In 1970, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Danby, future founders of Atari, attempt to create an arcade version of Space War and received licensing from Magnavox. Their game, renamed Computer Space, becomes the first ever arcade game to be released. in 1971. 1,500 copies distributed, but the general view is that they're too difficult to play. In 1972, Bear, the guy who rigged up the toy gun and soon to be known as the father of video games, is asked to create a television gaming apparatus and method, aka a console. In the same year, however, the Magnavox Odyssey, the first home video game system, is released, created by Atari, and Pong becomes the first game created for the system. Created by Al Alcorn, the competition is on. In 1975, Pong is released, and 150,000 Atari Magnavox Odyssey units are released. In the same year, Gunfight is released, the first game to use a microprocessor instead of hardwired solid-state circuits, if that means anything to you. In 1976, Atari becomes the first company to be sold to Warner Communications for $28 million. This money goes to support the Atari 2600, the next project. Bushnell, that's the guy who sold the Atari, later regrets this decision and refers to it as the worst mistake made in history.
You're watching the most exciting game you will ever see on your TV set. Telstar by Coleco.
Also in 1976, gaming hits off to a good start when a new company, Coleco, releases its first console called Telstar. And the Fairfield Camera and Instruments begins construction of its own gaming system, Channel F, the first programmable console, allowing players to switch between games simply by switching cartridges. In the same year, the first controversial game, Death Race, based on the movie Death Race 2000, could stir as it involves running over pedestrians. Those pixels sure are graphic.
Okay, Atari, let's see your best pitch. You're out, Rose!
In 1977, the most anticipated cartridge-based Atari 2600 is released, calling itself the Video Computer System, and each costing over $249. In 1978, the first sports game is released, Football, by Atari, and the evolutionary Space Invaders is released by the Japanese company Midway, the first game with a high score. The game is so popular it causes a national coin shortage in Japan. In the same year, the first console with a keyboard, Magnavox Odyssey 2, makes its debut, and Atari is commissioned to create a combat simulator for the US Department of Defense. In 1979, Atari develops the first handheld console, displaying holograms, and called the Atari Cosmos, which was never released. And Asteroids becomes the first game with a high score to allow you to enter your initials to be stored, so that you can check the leaderboards for information previously stored in the system. Fun, fun, fun.
Hills presents Intellivision, Intelligent Television by Mattel.
In 1980, Mattel says that they have better graphics than Atari, but sells its Intellivision for a higher price, at $299. In the same year, Battlezone becomes the first 3D game, and the first fight simulator set in a virtual battlefield, and Namco releases Puckman, a game later renamed to Pac-Man for its possibly offensive name. This was the first game to have an animated character with its own name. In 1981, the first gaming magazine is released, called Electronic Games, and Donkey Kong is released to the market, later to become a massive milestone in gaming. This game introduces the character of Mario to the gaming community.
If you think ColecoVision plays all Atari thought was his...
In 1982, Coleco and Atari's war is obvious when Atari releases the Atari 5200 to compete with ColecoVision.
On ColecoVision,
But won't their adapter?
it won't play Super System cartridges.
Not pole position?
Not this pole position.
Not centipede?
Dragon's Lair, the fantasy adventure where you become a valiant knight on a quest to rescue the fair princess from the clutches of an evil dragon.
In 1983, Dragon's Lair makes its debut by Cinematronics, and is the first game to use laser technology, and the Commodore 64 is released, the cheapest and most powerful system so far.
Industry's outstanding new product introduction since the birth of the industry.
In 1985, the Nintendo was released to the US market, followed by the big clash of consoles that we're more familiar with, including the first handheld console, the Nintendo Game Boy, released for the game known as Tetris, soon to become world famous. The same year as the Atari Lynx and the Sega Genesis. In 1991, the Super Nintendo was released. In 1992, Mortal Kombat becomes the first game to use digitalized actors' faces in violence, creating controversy.
Some of you believe your system is the most advanced in the universe. Let's review the
In 1993, the first 64-bit console hits the market, the Atari Jaguar, and a ban is argued for violence in video games. And so, in 1994, an M rating is introduced to gaming, for 15+. And the famous Doom is released, the first ever first-person shooter, developed by ID Software. Finally, in 1995, the big Sony PlayStation is released, and in 1996, the Nintendo 64 is released, another cartridge-based console. In 1997, something a little like a cross between a Game Boy and an iPad is invented, known as the Game.com, with a working stylus, touchscreen, and email access, along with a calculator and address book. In the year 2000, the PlayStation 2 is released, the first console to use DVD technology. It sells out the very morning of its release. And The Sims is released, later to be known as the best-selling PC game ever. In 2001, three great console giants are released: the Game Boy Advance, the GameCube, and the Microsoft Xbox. In the same year, Halo was released, known to be a major pioneer in the world of gaming. 2002 brings a game similar to today's Call of Duty, known as America's Army, a first-person shooter designed to attract new recruits, given out for free and later becoming the #1 online action game in the country. In 2004, the Angry Video Game Nerd is released, the first YouTube personality that reviews games in a stereotypical nerdy way. And that's that. Finally, back to the present. To date, there have been over 10 billion video games produced, including computer games, and over 130 consoles. Video games aren't given a particularly savoury view in society, as they're seen as the spawn of obesity. But who cares about that? Now, where's my pizza?